You don't actually lose your state, that's the illusion. What really happens is far more subtle, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it again. You abandon it quietly, unconsciously, almost automatically. Think about it. There are moments when you feel aligned, certain, grounded in the version of yourself you've decided to be. In those moments, nothing feels out of reach. Your mind is clear, your energy is steady, you are not chasing, you are embodying. And then something small happens, a delay, a message, a look, a thought, and suddenly, without even noticing the exact moment it happened, you are no longer that person. Now, most people will say, that's why, that situation made me feel this way, but that is not the truth. The situation had no power of its own. It only revealed a doorway, and you walked through it. You accepted a different state. This is where your power has been misunderstood. You have been trained to believe that the world acts upon you, that circumstances dictate your internal experience. But your state is not a reaction to life, it is the cause of how life appears to you. And the moment you react unconsciously, you step out of authorship and into submission. It's not dramatic, it doesn't announce itself, it feels justified. That's why it's so easy to miss. You tell yourself, of course I feel this way, anyone would, and in that moment you give away your authority. Not because something forced you to, but because you agreed to it. Awareness changes everything, because once you become aware of this pattern, you begin to catch it in real time. You start to notice the exact moment where you are tempted to leave your chosen state. It might feel like a pull, like gravity trying to bring you back to what is familiar. And in that moment you are faced with a decision. Do I remain who I decided to be, or do I return to who I used to be? This is the only real choice you ever make. Not once, but repeatedly. And each time you choose consciously, you strengthen that identity. Each time you abandon it, you reinforce the old one. Understand this clearly. Nothing outside of you has the authority to change your state. Not people, not circumstances, not time, only your agreement does. And most of the time that agreement is given so quickly, so automatically, that it feels like you had no say in it at all. But you do. The moment you stop blaming the outside, you reclaim that power. The moment you stop saying, this made me feel, and start recognizing I accepted this feeling, everything shifts. Because now if you accepted it, you can also refuse it. If you stepped out, you can step back in. And this is not about forcing yourself to feel something unnatural. It's about remembering what you already chose, returning to it, standing in it, even when the world tries to suggest otherwise. Because the truth is, your state was never taken from you, you simply let it go. Your state is not just something you feel from time to time. It is not a passing mood, not a temporary wave that rises and falls without meaning. Your state is your identity in motion. It is who you are being, expressed in real time. And this is where most people misunderstand the entire process. They try to control how they feel without ever questioning who they believe themselves to be. You can attempt to hold a state of confidence, abundance, or certainty for a few moments, even a few hours. But if beneath that effort you still see yourself as someone who struggles, doubts, or waits for validation, that state will not hold. It cannot. Because your identity will always pull you back to what feels true. This is why so many people feel like they are constantly starting over. They touch the state briefly, they feel it, they taste it, and then it slips away. Not because they failed, but because they were trying to sustain something that does not yet match their inner definition of self. You do not experience what you want. You experience what you are convinced you are. So if you find yourself falling out of your desired state, do not look at the state itself as the problem. Look deeper. Ask yourself, who am I being when no one is watching? What feels natural for me to return to? Because whatever feels natural, that is your current identity. And your state will always follow that. There is no effort in being who you believe you are. There is no struggle in maintaining a state that aligns with your self-concept. It becomes automatic. Just as it is easy for someone to feel insecure if they believe they are not enough, it becomes equally effortless to feel certain when they know they are. This is why forcing a state rarely works for long. You can try to think differently, act differently, even speak differently. But if it is not anchored in a new sense of self, it will feel like performance. And performance cannot sustain itself indefinitely. Eventually you return to what feels real. So the shift is not in trying harder to hold a state. The shift is in becoming the person for whom that state is natural. You move from effort to embodiment, from trying to be confident to simply being someone who is. And this does not happen by accident. It happens through conscious selection. You decide who you are, not based on past experiences, not based on current appearances, but based on what you choose to accept as true now. And then you begin to live from that decision. At first it may feel unfamiliar, even unnatural. But that is only because you have practiced the old identity for so long that it feels like home. Stay with the new one. Return to it again and again until it no longer feels like something you are trying to be, but something you simply are. Because once your identity shifts, your state no longer needs to be managed. It becomes your default. It stabilizes. It remains, not because you are holding on to it, but because it is an extension of you. And in that moment, you are no longer chasing a feeling. You are living as it. There is another reason you find yourself slipping out of your desired state, and it is one most people are not willing to confront. You are not just familiar with your old emotions, you are attached to them. In a way that is quiet, habitual, and deeply conditioned, you have become comfortable with what you say you want to escape. You may say you want peace, yet you return to worry. You may claim certainty, yet you revisit doubt. Not because you are weak, but because what is familiar feels safe, even when it limits you. The mind does not prioritize what is best for you. It prioritizes what it knows. So when you begin to step into a new state, one of confidence, clarity, or assurance, it can feel unfamiliar, almost unnatural. And in that unfamiliarity, there is a subtle pull backward, a quiet voice that suggests you are pretending, that this is not truly you. And if you are not aware, you will listen to it. That pull is not truth, it is conditioning. Over time, you have rehearsed certain emotional patterns so consistently that they have become automatic. Doubt, overthinking, hesitation. These are not random experiences. They are practiced responses, and anything practiced long enough begins to feel like identity. So when you attempt to remain in your desired state, you are not just choosing something new. You are interrupting something old. And that interruption creates tension. Not because the new state is wrong, but because the old one is deeply ingrained. You may notice this in subtle ways. Just as things begin to feel aligned, a thought appears, a question, a concern, something that invites you back into the familiar pattern. And without awareness, you follow it, you entertain it, you allow it to grow. And before long, you are no longer where you chose to be. This is not failure, this is momentum. The old state has been practiced more. It has more evidence, more repetition, more emotional investment. So naturally, it attempts to reassert itself. But understand this, just because something feels natural does not mean it is permanent. It only means it has been repeated, and what has been repeated can be replaced. The key is not to fight these patterns, nor to judge yourself for experiencing them. Resistance only strengthens what you are trying to release. Instead, you interrupt them, gently but firmly. You notice the thought, the feeling, the impulse, and you choose not to continue it. You do not follow it down the familiar path. You do not build upon it. You simply stop feeding it. And then you return. Return to the state you chose. Not with force, not with strain, but with quiet decision. Again and again, as many times as necessary. Because each time you do this, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. This is how change truly occurs. Not in one grand moment, but in repeated interruptions of what no longer serves you. At first, it may feel like you are doing this constantly, catching yourself, redirecting, returning. But over time, something begins to shift. The pull weakens, the old patterns lose their grip, and what once felt unnatural begins to feel steady. Until one day you realize the state you once struggled to maintain is now the one you naturally remain in, because the pattern has changed, and what you consistently return to becomes who you are. There is a subtle habit that keeps you from remaining in your desired state, and it is so common that it often goes unnoticed. You react, not occasionally, but almost automatically. Something happens, and before you even become aware of it, you have already adjusted your inner world to match what you see. You allow the outer to dictate the inner, and in doing so, you surrender the very power you are trying to master. Reaction feels natural because it is fast. It requires no awareness, no decision, no intention. It is simply the continuation of old patterns responding to familiar triggers. A situation appears, and your mind rushes to interpret it. It labels it as good or bad, right or wrong, favorable or threatening. And the moment you accept that interpretation, your state shifts to match it. But consider what is truly happening in that moment. You are not responding to reality itself, you are responding to your perception of it. And that perception is shaped by past assumptions, past experiences, and past identities. So what you call a reaction is often nothing more than the past repeating itself in the present. This is why reaction is so costly. It places your state at the mercy of appearances. It makes your inner world dependent on something that is constantly changing. And when your state is unstable, everything that flows from it becomes unstable as well. Those who understand this do not live in reaction. They live in direction. They decide first who they are, how they will be, what state they will occupy, and from that decision they meet the world, not the other way around. This is a quiet power. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need to fight circumstances or deny their existence. It simply refuses to be defined by them. When something appears that contradicts the chosen state, there is a pause, a space, and within that space a decision is made. Will I accept this as my reality, or will I remain as I have chosen to be? That pause changes everything, because in that moment you are no longer a passive observer reacting to life. You are an active participant, shaping your experience. You are no longer moved by the world, you are moving within it with intention. This does not mean you ignore what is happening. It means you refuse to let it determine who you are. You see it, you acknowledge it, but you do not internalize it. You do not allow it to rewrite your state, and this requires discipline. Not force, but awareness. The discipline to catch yourself before the reaction takes hold. The willingness to step back from the immediate impulse and choose deliberately. At first, this may feel unnatural. The mind is used to reacting quickly, almost impulsively. But as you practice this pause, this moment of conscious direction, something begins to shift. You feel less pulled by circumstances, less affected by appearances, more steady, more grounded in your chosen state. You begin to realize that your power was never in controlling the world around you. It was always in controlling the state from which you meet it. And from that state, everything begins to reorganize. Because when you no longer react, you no longer reinforce the old patterns. You no longer confirm the old identity. Instead, you consistently express the new one, regardless of what appears before you. And in time, the world reflects that consistency back to you. But it begins with this simple shift from reacting to directing, from being moved to deciding how you move. There is a misunderstanding that keeps many people trapped in a cycle of starting and stopping, rising and falling, stepping into their desired state only to slip out of it again. They believe that what they need is more intensity, more motivation, a stronger feeling, a deeper conviction, a more powerful moment that will somehow lock them into that state permanently. But intensity is not what creates stability. Intensity is fleeting. It rises quickly, and just as quickly it fades. You can feel absolutely certain one moment, completely aligned, completely immersed in the version of yourself you have chosen, and then without warning that intensity softens. And if you have relied on that intensity to sustain your state, you will believe you have lost it. This is where the cycle begins. You try to recreate the feeling. You chase the same level of emotion, the same clarity, the same certainty. And when it does not return in the same way, you assume something has gone wrong. But nothing has gone wrong. You have simply mistaken a moment of intensity for a foundation. What truly sustains your state is not how strongly you feel it in one moment, but how consistently you return to it across many moments. Consistency is quiet. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with overwhelming emotion. It is a simple, steady returning, a decision made again and again, regardless of how you feel in that moment. There will be times when your chosen state feels natural, effortless, almost automatic. And there will be times when it feels distant, when your mind drifts, when old patterns begin to surface. In those moments, consistency becomes your anchor, not forcing yourself into a feeling, but gently bringing yourself back to the state you have chosen, again and again. This is where real change happens, not in a single breakthrough, but in repeated returns. Each time you come back, you reinforce the state, you strengthen it, you make it more familiar, more stable, more natural. And just as the old patterns were built through repetition, the new state is established the same way, through persistence, not intensity. Understand this clearly. You do not fail when you drift. You only delay when you do not return. The drifting is part of the process. The mind will wander. The old identity will attempt to reassert itself. But what matters is not that it happens, it is how quickly you recognize it and how willingly you return. At first you may find yourself returning often, catching yourself, redirecting, choosing again. It may feel repetitive, but this repetition is not a sign of struggle, it is the very mechanism of transformation. Over time, something begins to change. The distance between your returns shortens. The pull of the old state weakens. The new state begins to hold itself with less effort. What once required conscious attention becomes more automatic. And eventually you reach a point where you are no longer trying to maintain your state. You are simply living from it. Because consistency has done what intensity never could. It has made your state familiar. It has made it yours. So do not wait for the perfect feeling, the perfect moment, the perfect surge of certainty. Do not measure your progress by how strongly you feel, but by how often you return. Because it is not the intensity of a moment that defines you, it is the consistency of your return. There comes a point where understanding is no longer the issue. You begin to see the pattern clearly. You recognize when you are leaving your state, you understand why it happens, you even know how to return. And yet, despite all of this awareness, there are still moments where you slip back, not because you don't know better, but because you have not fully decided. As long as your desired state remains something you visit, something you practice, something you try to maintain when it feels convenient, it will never become permanent. It will always feel optional. And anything that feels optional can be abandoned the moment it is challenged. This is the quiet line most people never cross. They entertain the idea of change, they experiment with a new identity, but they leave the door open to return to the old one, just in case, just when it feels easier, just when circumstances seem too convincing to ignore. But transformation does not occur in that space of hesitation. It requires a decision that is deeper than preference, a decision that does not depend on mood, on evidence, or on immediate results, a decision that defines who you are, regardless of what appears around you. When your state becomes non-negotiable, everything shifts. You are no longer asking yourself, can I hold this, or is this working? Those questions disappear, because you are no longer trying to maintain something, you are expressing something that you have already accepted as true. Think of it this way. There are certain things about yourself you do not question. You do not wake up each day wondering if you will remain who you have always believed yourself to be. You simply are. That certainty is not something you actively maintain. It is something you have accepted so completely that it no longer requires effort. This is the same level of certainty your desired state must reach. It must move beyond practice and into identity, beyond effort and into decision. A point where you no longer entertain alternatives, no longer negotiate with old patterns, no longer give attention to anything that contradicts who you have chosen to be. And this does not mean you will never feel challenged. It does not mean circumstances will suddenly align in every moment. What changes is not the appearance of the world, but your relationship to it. You remain unchanged within it. There may still be moments where old thoughts arise, where familiar emotions attempt to return, but they no longer carry authority, they no longer persuade you, because you have already decided, and a true decision does not need to be repeated in doubt. It stands, it holds, it defines your response before anything even occurs. This is where permanence is created, not through effort, not through constant correction, but through a standard you refuse to lower. You no longer ask if you can stay in your state. You decide that you do.